The year was 2187, and humanity had finally found peace among itself. The old wars were memories now. Nations still existed, but they worked together more than they fought. Earth was home to 12 billion people, who woke up every morning believing tomorrow would be better than today. Colonies on Mars were growing. Mining ships worked the asteroid belt. Humanity looked at the stars and dreamed of reaching them. Captain Daniel Wright was a simple man with simple beliefs. He believed in duty and honor and protecting the people who could not protect themselves. He commanded the Earth defense vessel Defiance, and on this particular day he was running a routine patrol near Jupiter. His crew of 47 men and women went about their tasks with the boredom that comes from endless days of nothing happening. Then something happened. The sensor officer shouted that she was detecting an energy spike unlike anything in their records. Captain Wright moved to her station and watched the screen fill with contacts. 1 became 10. 10 became 50. 50 became 300. Massive ships emerged from tiers in space itself, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They arranged themselves in perfect formation, like predators surrounding their prey. Captain Reliz felt fear, but he did not show it. He ordered his communications officer to open all channels and attempt contact. The response came quickly. A face appeared on the main screen that was not human. It had gray skin and 4 eyes and a mouth full of teeth that were clearly meant for tearing flesh. The creature called itself Ambassador Kethril of the Vorthan Dominion, and it spoke perfect English with no emotion whatsoever. The message was simple. The Galactic Council had been watching Earth for 200 years. They had studied humanity and judged them. The verdict was submission or extinction. Earth possessed resources the Council required. Its position on the edge of the galaxy made it strategically valuable. Humans would serve the Council as a labor species, or they would be erased from existence. There was no third option. Captain Wright listened to every word. When the transmission ended, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he ordered his ship to retreat at maximum speed toward Earth. The Council fleet did not pursue. They did not need to. They knew exactly where humanity lived. The news reached Earth within hours. Secretary General Maria Santos was a woman who had spent her entire life in politics. She had seen crises before: economic collapses, natural disasters, regional conflicts that threatened to become global wars. Nothing had prepared her for this. She stood before the United Nations General Assembly and played the alien transmission for every representative of every nation on Earth. The room fell silent. Some representatives wept. Others prayed. A few simply stared at nothing with empty eyes. The weight of extinction pressed down on every soul in that chamber. Outside, the building panic spread through the streets of New York. The transmission had been intercepted and broadcast by every news network on the planet. Within hours, every human being knew that aliens existed, and those aliens wanted to enslave them. Markets crashed. Riots erupted in major cities. Religious leaders declared the end times had arrived. Governments struggled to maintain order as civilization teetered on the edge of collapse. Secretary General Santos watched the chaos unfold from her office window. She had expected despair. She had expected surrender. What she did not expect was what happened next. General Kevin Mitchell was 63 years old, had fought in 3 wars. He had seen the worst humanity could do to itself, and somehow kept believing in the species. When the alien transmission reached military command, he gathered his staff and began analyzing everything they could learn from those few minutes of contact. The fleet composition, the ship designs, the communication protocols, everything. He presented his findings to Secretary General Santos the next morning. His assessment was grim. The alien technology was centuries ahead of anything humanity possessed. Their numbers were overwhelming. By every conventional measure, Earth had no chance of victory. The logical choice was surrender and hope for mercy. Then General Mitchell said something that changed everything. He told the Secretary General that he had noticed something strange in the alien transmission. Ambassador Kethril had spoken of conquering 47 species. He had described humanity's options as submission or extinction, but there was no mention of war. No discussion of battles or resistance. The Council did not expect anyone to fight because no one ever had. Every species they encountered simply gave up when faced with superior force. Secretary General Santos understood immediately. The Council had never faced an enemy willing to die rather than surrender. They had conquered through intimidation alone. Their military might was real, but it had never been truly tested. She made her decision. Earth would not submit. Earth would fight. And if Earth had to die, then it would make the Council pay such a terrible price that no other species would ever be threatened again. The response was broadcast on every frequency. The Council was monitoring. Secretary General Santos stood before the cameras with fire in her eyes. She spoke directly to Ambassador Cathrell and through him to the entire Galactic Council. Her words were few, but they carried the weight of 12 billion souls who had chosen. Defiance over slavery. She said one word first: die. Then she continued. She told them that humanity rejected their ultimatum. She told them that every man and woman and child on Earth would fight until their last breath. She told them that for every human they killed, they would lose 1,000 of their own. She promised them that even if they won, they would never forget the price of their victory. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, species who had lived under Council rule for centuries heard the message. They heard a primitive species from an insignificant world tell the most powerful force in the universe to die. Most thought humanity was insane. Some thought they were foolish. A few felt something they had not felt in generations. Hoped on Earth, the panic began to transform into something else. Fear remained, but it was joined by anger. The nations of the world stopped bickering over borders and resources. Old enemies shook hands and pledged to stand together. Factories that built cars began building weapons. Scientists who studied medicine began studying alien technology. Soldiers who had trained to fight each other began training to fight together. Captain. His request was granted immediately. He looked up at the stars that night and thought about the fleet waiting out there in the darkness. He was afraid. Any sane person would be afraid. But he was also ready. Humanity had sent its message. Now they would see if they could back it up. The war for Earth had begun. The Council fleet moved toward Earth with the patience of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. 300 warships advanced in perfect formation across the darkness of space. Ambassador Cathrell stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the small blue world grow larger on his screens. He had conquered 12 worlds in his career. This one would be no different. The humans had sent their defiant message, and he had found it amusing. Primitive species often made noise before they submitted. It meant nothing. Admiral Patricia. Cole was 51 years old and had spent 30 years in the Earth Defense Force. She had commanded destroyers and cruisers, and now she commanded the entire human fleet. 87 ships against 300. The numbers were hopeless, and she knew it. Every officer under her command knew it. They were going to fight anyway. She gathered her captains for a final briefing before the battle. She told them the truth because they deserved nothing less. She said that conventional tactics would not work. They could not match the Council in firepower, or numbers, or technology. If they tried to fight a straight battle, they would be destroyed in minutes. So they would not fight a straight battle. On Earth, a man named Samuel Green was working in a laboratory beneath the city of Geneva. He was a physicist who had spent his career studying theoretical concepts that most people could not understand. When the alien fleet arrived, his research became the most important work on the planet. A Council scout ship had been destroyed near Saturn 3 weeks earlier. Fragments of its hull and systems had been recovered and brought to his facility. Dr. Green worked without sleep for days. He studied the alien metals and energy signatures and shield technology. He ran simulations and calculations until his eyes burned and his hands shook. Then he found something that made him laugh out loud in the empty laboratory. The Council shields were designed to absorb and deflect energy weapons. Lasers and plasma and particle beams would splash harmlessly against them. Every advanced species in the galaxy used energy weapons because they were efficient and precise. The Council had calibrated their defenses against these weapons over thousands of years of conquest, but humanity had never abandoned kinetic weapons. Bullets and missiles and railguns were still part of human arsenals, because humans had never stopped finding new ways to kill each other. The Council had no defense against simple metal moving at incredible speeds. Dr. Green sent his findings to Admiral Cole immediately. Within hours, every ship in the human fleet was being modified. Railguns were mounted alongside energy weapons. Cargo holds were filled with tungsten rods. Missile systems were loaded with kinetic warheads. The humans were going to throw rocks at their enemy, because rocks were the one thing the enemy did not expect. The first engagement happened near the orbit of Mars. The Council fleet expected the humans to form defensive lines and fight a retreating action. Instead, Admiral Cole ordered her ships to charge directly at the enemy formation. The Council commanders were confused by this suicidal tactic, but they held their positions and prepared to destroy the primitive vessels. Then the humans opened fire. Tungsten rods accelerated. 2–3% of light speed crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds. The Council shields flickered and failed as physical objects tore through energy barriers designed to stop beams of light. 27 Council ships were destroyed in the first 90 seconds of combat. Their hulls were punctured by hundreds of metal projectiles that passed through them like needles through cloth. Ambassador Kethro watched his tactical display fill with damage reports and could not understand what he was seeing. His officers had no explanation. No species used kinetic weapons. No species had used kinetic weapons in 3,000 years. The very concept was considered primitive and obsolete. The humans did not care what was considered primitive. They cared about what worked. Admiral Cole pressed her advantage while the Council fleet was in chaos. She ordered her ships to scatter and reform into small attack groups that struck at different points of the enemy formation. The Council commanders tried to coordinate their response, but their communications were overwhelmed with distress calls and damage assessments. By the time they restored order, they had lost 53 ships. The victory was not without cost. 18 human vessels were destroyed in the engagement. Hundreds of sailors died in the cold vacuum of space. Admiral Cole felt every loss like a wound in her own body, but she could not afford to mourn. Not yet. There would be time for grief when the war was over. On Earth, the news of the battle spread like wildfire. Humanity had won its first engagement against an enemy that had never been defeated. The celebrations were brief because everyone knew the war had only begun. But something fundamental had changed in the human spirit. They were no longer victims waiting to be slaughtered. They were fighters who had drawn first blood. The Council fleet regrouped and adapted. Ambassador Cothrell ordered his engineers to develop countermeasures against kinetic weapons. Shields were recalibrated. Point defense systems were modified. The Council had not survived 3,000 years by being unable to learn from their mistakes. Lieutenant Commander Nicole Gray was 29 years old and flew a modified fighter craft that could barely survive a single hit from Council weapons. She volunteered to lead a squadron against the enemy flagship, because someone had to do it, and she was tired of waiting for someone else to step forward. 12 pilots followed her into the darkness, knowing most of them would not return. The attack was chaos and fire and death. Council interceptors swarmed around the human fighters like angry insects. Nicole watched her squadron die one by one as they pushed deeper into the enemy formation. She lost her wingman when a plasma burst vaporized his cockpit. She lost her best friend when a collision sent her spinning into the void. 8 pilots died before they reached their target, but 4 of them made it through. Nicole Gray fired everything her fighter carried at the flagship's communication array. Missiles and railgun rounds, and even her emergency fuel tanks converted into improvised explosives. The array exploded in a shower of metal and energy. The Council flagship went silent, and the invasion fleet lost contact with Council command. Nicole and 2 other survivors limped back to the human lines with damaged ships and wounded bodies. She did not feel like a hero. She felt like a woman who had watched her friends die. But what she had done mattered. The Council could no longer call for reinforcements or receive new orders. They were alone. General Kevin Mitchell watched the battle reports from his command center on Earth. He saw the casualty figures and the damage assessments and the resource expenditures. The math was still against them. Humanity was losing ships faster than they could build them. But they were also proving something that the galaxy had forgotten. Some species do not surrender. Some species would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. The Council had awakened something ancient and terrible in humanity. They had reminded humans what they were capable of when survival was at stake. The war continued. Both sides learned and adapted and bled. The Council brought in new weapons and new tactics. Humanity responded with ingenuity and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The solar system became a graveyard of broken ships and frozen bodies. But humanity held the line. Day after day, in battle after battle, they held the line. And across the galaxy, the subject species of the Council began to whisper a question that had not been asked in centuries. What if the Masters could be beaten? The galaxy was vast beyond human understanding. Billions of stars spread across the darkness like scattered diamonds. Thousands of worlds orbited those stars, and on many of those worlds intelligent beings lived and worked and dreamed. Most of them had never heard of Earth. Most of them did not know that a small blue planet existed on the edge of the galaxy. But they were about to learn. News traveled fast, even across the impossible distances of space. Traders carried stories from system to system. Smugglers whispered secrets in dark corners of space stations. Slaves passed messages through hidden networks that their masters never suspected existed. And the story they told was impossible. A primitive species had defied the Galactic Concil. A world that had barely discovered faster than light travel had destroyed Council warships. The masters who had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years were bleeding. On the mining world of Keth, Prime of Orth, an overseer named Grethel walked through the tunnels, where Drexy slaves extracted precious metals from the rock. The Drexy were small creatures with gray skin and large eyes that saw perfectly in the darkness. They had served the Council for 800 years. Their homeworld was a dead rock now because they had once tried to resist. The survivors had learned to obey without question. Grethel stopped beside a worker who was moving too slowly. He raised his shock staff and prepared to deliver punishment. This was routine. This was how things had always been. The weak served, the strong in pain was the tool that maintained order. But something was different today. The Drexy worker looked up at the overseer with an expression Grethel had never seen before. There was no fear in those large eyes. There was something else. Something that made the overseer hesitate for the first time in his life. The worker spoke a single word. Earth Grethel did not understand. He brought the shock staff down anyway. But before it could connect, another Drexy grabbed his arm. Then another. Then a dozen. The overseer screamed for help, but no help came. The tunnels of Keth Prime erupted in violence that spread from level to level until the entire mining complex was in chaos. The rebellion was bloody and disorganized. Should have failed. The Drexy had no weapons and no training and no plan. But they had something they had lost 800 years ago. They had hope. And hope made them willing to die for a chance at freedom. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On factory worlds and agricultural planets and orbital stations, the subject species heard the story of Earth and began to remember what it felt like to resist. Not every uprising succeeded. Many were crushed with brutal efficiency, but each one forced the Council to divert resources away from the conquest of Earth. Ambassador Kethrel received reports of the spreading unrest and felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. The humans should have been easy prey. They should have surrendered after the first demonstration of Council power. Instead, they had sparked something that threatened to consume the entire empire. Back in the solar system, the war continued without pause. The Council had established a beachhead on Luna and was using the far side of the moon as a staging ground for the invasion of Earth. Colonel Benjamin Hayes commanded the defense of Armstrong Base, which was the last human stronghold on the lunar surface. His garrison numbered 3,000 soldiers against a council, a force of 30,000. The siege began on a Tuesday and did not end for 47 days. Colonel Hayes was a quiet man who had never sought glory or recognition. He had joined the military because he believed in service and sacrifice. Now he found himself responsible for holding a position that military logic said could not be held. He gathered his officers and told them the truth. Reinforcements were not coming. Retreat was not possible. They would hold Armstrong Base, or they would die trying. The fighting was brutal beyond anything humans had experienced before. Council soldiers attacked through the tunnels and corridors of the base in waves that seemed endless. Human defenders fought with rifles and grenades, and sometimes with knives in bare hands when ammunition ran out. The artificial gravity failed in the third week, and combat became a three-dimensional nightmare of floating bodies and blood that hung in the air like red rain. Colonel Hayes lost friends he had known for decades. He wrote letters to families that would never see their loved ones again. He made decisions that sent young men and women to their deaths because there was no other choice. The weight of command pressed down on him until he thought he would break. But he did not break. On the 35th day, the council launched their largest assault. 10,000 soldiers attacked from 3 directions simultaneously. The human lines buckled and nearly collapsed. Colonel Hayes grabbed a rifle and led a counterattack personally because there was no one else left to lead it. He was wounded twice, but kept fighting until the council forces retreated. The siege ended when human reinforcements finally broke through the council blockade. Admiral Cole had sacrificed 12 ships to create an opening in the enemy lines. Fresh troops landed at Armstrong Base and found Colonel Hayes still standing at his post with a rifle in his hands and blood soaking through his uniform. He had lost 2,200 soldiers. He had held the line while the fighting raged on Luna. Something remarkable was happening on Earth. Dr. Samuel Green had continued his research into Council technology. The fragments recovered from destroyed enemy ships provided insights into propulsion and energy generation, and most importantly, faster-than-light travel. Human scientists worked around the clock to understand principles that should have taken centuries to discover. The breakthrough came on a rainy morning in Geneva. Dr. Green stared at his calculations and realized that he had solved the puzzle. He understood how council ships folded space to travel between stars. More importantly, he understood how to build a human ship that could do the same thing. 6 months later, the first human warp-capable warship launched from orbital shipyards above Earth. They named it the Retribution, because humanity was no longer interested in mere survival. The ship was not elegant or refined. It was a brutal machine designed for one purpose. War Captain Daniel Wright took command of the Retribution because he had been there when this all began. He had seen the Council fleet arrive. He had heard their ultimatum. He had spent 2 years fighting to protect his homeworld. Now he was going to take the fight to the enemy. The Retribution's first target was a Council supply depot 300 light-years from Earth. The attack was swift and devastating. Human soldiers stormed the station and captured enough supplies to fuel their war effort for months. Captain Wright broadcast a message before departing that was heard across the galaxy. He said that Earth remembered what the Council had threatened. He said that humanity was coming for them. He told them to run if they wished, because it would not save them. The Council had wanted to conquer a primitive world. Instead, they had created an enemy that would chase them to the edge of the universe. The message that Secretary General Santos had sent was no longer just words. It was a promise that humanity intended to keep. 2 years had passed since the Council fleet first appeared in human space. 2 years of blood and fire and endless sacrifice. The galaxy that existed before the war was gone forever. A new galaxy was being born in the flames of rebellion, and humanity stood at the center of it all. The Galactic Council had once ruled over 300 star systems without question. Their word was law. Their fleets were invincible. Their authority was absolute. Now they struggled to maintain control of half their former territory. Slave revolts had become full rebellions. Subject species that had been obedient for centuries now fought with weapons stolen from their masters. The empire was crumbling from within. Admiral Patricia Cole stood on the bridge of her flagship and studied the tactical display before her. She commanded a fleet of over 200 warships now. Some were human designs built in orbital shipyards that worked day and night. Others were captured council vessels that had been modified to serve new masters. Her crews were a mix of humans and liberated, aliens who had chosen to fight alongside their rescuers. The time had come to take back the solar system. Operation Homecoming was the largest military offensive in human history. The goal was simple, but the execution would be anything but. Council forces had fortified Luna heavily after the siege of Armstrong Base. They had turned the moon into a fortress bristling with weapons and shields and tens of thousands of soldiers. Breaking that fortress would cost lives that humanity could barely afford to lose. Admiral Cole addressed her captains through a fleet-wide broadcast. She did not make promises of easy victory or minimal casualties. She told them the truth because they deserved nothing less. She said that many of them would not survive the coming battle. She said that their sacrifice would be remembered for as long as humanity existed. She said that the children of Earth were watching and waiting, praying for their defenders to come home. Then she gave the order to attack. The Battle of Luna began at dawn. Earth time, though dawn meant nothing in the darkness of space. Council defense platforms opened fire as soon as the human fleet came within range. Energy beams and plasma bursts and kinetic rounds filled the void between the fleets. Ships on both sides died in the first minutes of the engagement. Admiral Cole had studied Council tactics for 2 years. She knew how they thought and how they reacted to threats. She used that knowledge to deceive them. 30 human ships broke formation and attacked the far side of Luna in what appeared to be a desperate suicide run. The Council commanders saw an opportunity to destroy a significant portion of the enemy fleet and diverted their reserves too. Intercept. It was exactly what Admiral Cole wanted the moment the Council reserves moved out of position. She struck at their command center with everything she had left. 170 warships concentrated their fire on a single point in the enemy defensive line. The shields held for 11 seconds before they collapsed. Human ships poured through the gap and descended on the Council fortress like wolves on wounded prey. Commander Eric Stone led the ground assault. He was 34 years old and had been fighting since the first day of the war. He had lost count of how many battles he had survived. He had stopped counting the friends he had buried. All that remained was the mission and the grim determination to see it through. His Marines landed on the lunar surface under heavy fire. Transport ships exploded around them as Council gunners found their range. Stone lost 200 soldiers before they even reached the fortress walls. He lost 300 more breaching the outer defenses. But he kept pushing forward because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failure. The fighting inside the fortress was unlike anything Stone had experienced. Council soldiers defended every corridor and every room with fanatical determination. They knew that losing Luna meant losing their foothold in human space. They fought with the desperation of warriors who had nowhere left to retreat. Human Marines answered that desperation with fury. They cleared rooms with grenades and rifle fire. They engaged in hand-to-hand combat when ammunition ran low. They dragged wounded comrades to safety while still shooting at the enemy. The fortress became a maze of smoke and blood and screaming. Commander Stone reached the Central Command Center after 72 hours of continuous combat. His armor was scarred and dented. His rifle was nearly empty. Half the soldiers who had started the assault with him were dead or wounded, but he was still standing, and that was enough. The Council commander refused to surrender. He activated a self-destruct sequence that would destroy the entire fortress and everyone in it. Stone shot him before he could complete the activation. Then he planted the flag of Earth on the highest point of the structure while his Marines secured the remaining Council soldiers. The image was broadcast across the galaxy. A human soldier standing on the ruins of a Council fortress with the blue and green flag of Earth flying behind him. It was more than a military victory. It was a symbol that the masters could be defeated, that the strong did not always triumph over the weak. On the Council homeworld, panic gripped the ruling elite. High Chancellor Vortek convened an emergency session of the Council leadership. For the first time in 3,000 years, they discussed the possibility of negotiating with a species they had intended to enslave. Some argued for peace. Others demanded more ships and more soldiers and more weapons. The debate raged for hours without resolution. Secretary General Maria Santos ended the debate with a single broadcast. She addressed the galaxy and spoke of everything humanity had suffered. The cities that had been destroyed, the families that had been torn apart, the millions who had died defending their world against unprovoked aggression. She said that the Council had wanted to enslave humanity, and that humanity had decided to end the Council instead. The Free Species Alliance announced their support within hours. Drexy and Kelmari and a dozen other liberated species pledged their ships and soldiers to the human cause. For the first time, the Council faced not just one defiant world, but dozens. The hunter had become the hunted. General Kevin Mitchell unveiled Project Prometheus at a secure military facility deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Human scientists had spent 2 years studying Council technology and improving upon it. They had developed weapons that could destabilize stars. The same technology the Council had once used to threaten Earth would now be turned against them. The final phase of the war was about to begin. Humanity and its allies would march across the galaxy until they reached the Council homeworld itself. There would be no negotiation. There would be no mercy. The Council had taught humanity that the universe was cruel and unforgiving. Humanity had learned that lesson well. Now they would teach it to the Council. The Council homeworld of Verkith was beautiful in a cold and terrible way. Massive cities of glass and metal spread across continents that had never known war. Orbital stations circled the planet like glittering jewels suspended in the darkness. For 3,000 years, this world had been the untouchable heart of galactic civilization. Its citizens had watched the conquest of countless species from the comfort of their homes. They had never imagined that war could come to them. That imagination failed them on the day the human fleet arrived. Admiral Patricia Cole commanded the largest armada ever assembled in the history of the galaxy. 400 human warships formed the core of the fleet. 300 vessels from allied species flew alongside them. Drexy cruisers and Kelmari destroyers and ships from a dozen other worlds that had thrown off the chains of Council rule. Together, they represented the combined might of every species the Council had ever wronged. The Council Defense Fleet was waiting for them. 200 warships crewed by the finest officers in the Empire. Orbital fortresses that had never fired a shot in anger because no enemy had ever come close enough to threaten them. Weapon systems that represented the peak of 3,000 years of technological development. It was not enough. High Chancellor Vortek broadcast a desperate plea as the Allied fleet approached. He offered unconditional surrender. He promised reparations that would bankrupt his empire. He begged for mercy, with words that had never before passed the lips of a Council leader. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the Masters knelt before the species they had tried to enslave. Captain Daniel Wright responded to the plea. His voice was calm and cold as he spoke. He asked if the Council had offered mercy to the Drexy when they burned their homeworld to ashes. He asked if they had shown compassion to the Kelmari when they sterilized their colonies and scattered the survivors across the galaxy. He asked if they had considered peace when they demanded that humanity choose between slavery and extinction. The answer to all those questions was no. Captain Wright told High Chancellor Vortek that humanity remembered what the Council did not. Every species they had destroyed, every world they had enslaved, every life they had crushed beneath their boots. He said that humanity had come to collect the debt that was owed. Then he closed the communication channel. The Battle of Verkith. It lasted 3 days. Council defenders fought with the courage of warriors who knew they were protecting their homes and families. They threw everything they had at the Allied fleet. Ancient orbital fortresses that had defended the homeworld for millennia unleashed weapons that could crack planets. Elite squadrons piloted by the finest officers in the Empire engaged human fighters in desperate dogfights that filled space with fire and wreckage. Admiral Cole lost ships by the dozen. Human sailors and allied warriors died by the thousands. The cost of victory was paid in blood with every hour that passed. But the Allied fleet kept advancing. They pushed through the Council defenses with the unstoppable momentum of a species that had learned to embrace sacrifice. Commander Eric Stone led the assault on the Council capital city. His Marines descended from orbit in dropships that screamed through the atmosphere like falling stars. Half of them were shot down before they reached the ground. The survivors landed in the streets of a city that had never known the sound of gunfire. The fighting was street by street and building by building. Council soldiers and armed civilians defended their home with weapons they barely knew how to use. Commander Stone respected their courage even as his Marines cut through their defenses. He took no pleasure in the killing. He simply did what had to be done because someone had to do it. Dr. Samuel Green accompanied the ground forces with a special team of scientists and soldiers. Their mission was to secure the Council's central database. 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge waited in that facility. The secrets of 100 conquered civilizations. Technology that could advance humanity by centuries. It was too valuable to destroy and too dangerous. To leave in Council hands, the database was defended by the Council's elite guard. Dr. Green watched soldiers die too, protect him as they pushed deeper into the facility. He was a scientist who had spent his life studying equations and theories. Now he walked through corridors filled with bodies and tried not to think about what he was seeing. He focused on the mission because the mission was all that mattered. They reached the database core as the battle above the city reached its climax. Dr. Green connected to the system and began downloading everything it contained. The knowledge of 100 worlds flowed into human storage devices. Secrets that the Council had guarded for millennia became the property of the species they had tried to enslave. High Chancellor Vortek made his final stand in the Council chamber itself. He was surrounded by his personal guard and armed with a weapon he had never fired in his life. Commander Stone offered him the chance to surrender. He promised that prisoners would be treated fairly, and that war crimes tribunals would follow proper procedures. Vortek refused. He said that the Council would rather die than submit to primitives. He raised his weapon and fired at Commander Stone. The shot missed. The return fire did not. High Chancellor Vortek fell dead in the chamber, where his ancestors had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. His guards surrendered moments later. The war was over. Secretary General Maria Santos addressed the galaxy one final time. She stood in the ruins of the Council chamber with Commander Stone and Admiral Cole and Captain Wright and Dr. Green at her side. Behind her, the flag of Earth hung where the Council banner had flown for 30 centuries. She spoke not of victory but of the future. She said that humanity had not fought this war for conquest or revenge. They had fought for survival. They had fought for freedom. They had fought because when faced with extinction, they chose to stand rather than kneel. She offered the galaxy a choice. The same choice that humanity had made when the Council fleet first appeared in their sky. Stand together as equals. Build something better than the empire that had fallen. Create a future where no species would ever face enslavement again. Or threaten humanity and discover that the message they had sent to the Council was not a bluff. The message had been simple. Die. The galaxy chose peace. Admiral Cole returned to Earth as a hero, but she felt no joy. She thought of the sailors she had lost and the orders she had given. The weight of command that would never leave her shoulders. Commander Stone retired to a small farm, far from any city. He tried to forget the things he had seen. He never entirely succeeded. Captain Wright took command of humanity's first deep exploration fleet. He searched for new worlds and new civilizations and hoped that humanity would do better than those who came before. Dr. Green continued his research and unlocked secrets that changed everything humans thought. They knew about the universe, and across the galaxy species who had once cowered before the Council looked up at the stars and felt something they had. Forgotten hope. Because somewhere out there on a small blue world a species had proven that the strong do not always win, that empires can fall, that even the smallest spark of defiance can become a fire that consumes everything. The galaxy would never forget. What humanity taught them: when pushed, humans push back, and they never stop.